Well, welcome to Ascent Church. We're so excited to have all of you for this Celebration Sunday. What a great day to celebrate this new season we have as a church, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that today, as well as we have a great reception planned after the service with lunch, and it should be a great time to fellowship, as well as a chance to celebrate the graduates, the class of 2021. We have many graduates with us today, and I can't wait. At the end of the service, we're actually going to be able to pray for these graduates and honor them. So really looking forward to that time to celebrate them. And in God's Word today, fittingly, we're going to be talking about what's next. So all of these graduates that are here, you've done all this hard work, all of this education. I mean, I know Gray, graduate, I was talking to him before service. I was like, it's going to be different. You've probably been the life of the party this week, man. You've had all of these great times. I mean, all of these graduates, Alex and Caleb and Maya, I'm excited to get a chance to pray. And it's like, you get to the end of all this hard work, education, and it's like, okay, well, what now? What do I do with all of this training? What is the call of God with all of these things that He's given to me to do? What am I going to do in life? What's next? And, this is a question for the graduates, but it's bigger than that. Because all of us have to ask this question. What is the call of God on my life? What is it that He has for me to do in my life? So, I've been very interested in the life of Leonardo da Vinci, the great Italian Renaissance artist, and I talked about him a few weeks ago. I had a chance to visit Milan, Italy, where da Vinci actually did a lot of his work. It's where, he spent a lot of his time as an artist. And I got a chance to see the Last Supper, which is one of his great masterpieces. It's got this fascinating painting of Christ and His disciples celebrating the Last Supper. And so Da Vinci, he's this guy who, he's good-looking, intelligent, gifted artist. This is somebody that you would think, he's got it all going for him. He is somebody you would look up to, somebody you would want to meet and get to know. But in the story of Da Vinci's life, it takes a bit of a strange turn. So when Da Vinci began his work in life, he was an artist. And so he began collecting sponsors. He was actually sponsored to do this great painting that he was doing for these sponsors that wanted his gifts in their places that they were having these different paintings and artwork done. But as he got kind of into his profession, he kind of got distracted he kind of started dabbling in these other areas. He became an inventor. He also began writing. And so he did all these things. And so he kind of does this. He gets to the end of his life, and he's kind of reflecting, and it's kind of this melancholy feel where his, inventions are not being used. His writings, many things that he had written were unpublished, inaccessible to those that he was hoping to, bring these things to. And even his great masterpieces, like the Last Supper, are beginning to decay in his own lifetime. And so he's kind of looking at all of this, and he says this at the end of his life: so little time, so much left undone. We should not desire the impossible. So for someone so gifted, so talented, somebody with so much promise, how could this happen? This is a picture of us trying to find our calling and seeing that pursuit end in frustration. You ever had an experience like this? Os Guinness, in his book, The Call, he talks about this whole seeking of fulfilling our calling, and he says this: the expectation that we can all live purposeful lives has been given a gigantic boost by modern society's offer of the maximum opportunity for choice and change in all we do. So pause there for a minute. Maximum opportunity. So this opportunity that we have in the modern day, I mean, we have so many luxuries afforded to us as we have, more wealth as a nation, as people. It gives us more flexibility with our time and how we're going to spend our time. It also, with the availability of information, think about the access we have right on our smartphones. I mean, we have so much information, and that gives us all these choices that we can choose from that would have never been possible before. But, Os Guinness continues, he says, but out of more than a score of great civilizations in human history, the modern West is the very first to have no agreed-on answer to the question of the purpose of life. Thus, more ignorance, confusion, and longing surround this topic now than at any time in human history. What a sad and true but tragic indictment on our day. So much opportunity, so much flexibility in our schedule, so much time and energy and information, and we don't know what to do with it. There's no calling to animate what it is that we're supposed to do with all of these incredible resources that we've been given. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is what is this calling that we have, that all of us have? And for any of us, if we're going to ask the question about what is the calling in my life, all of us need to begin with understanding, well, what does my Creator, God, what is His call on my life? And so let's read the call of God from Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. It says this. Then God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness. So God created man in His own image, and in the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them, and God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is God's holy word. So, in this passage, we see that in verse 26, we are made in the image of God. So that means that we, being made in His image, we want to be like Him. Our heart convicts us for immorality, when we harm others instead of loving others. This is a reflection of who I am is made in the image of God. I want to reflect that image. And then God says here in verse 28 that we are to be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, all of these things. This is the call of God on our lives. And much like who we are is to reflect this image of God, so also here, what we do, the purpose we serve, is meant to reflect this call of God that's on our lives. Because of this being created in this way, our purposes are to answer this very call. So think of it this way. If you have an instrument, it's designed to fulfill an intended purpose. Think of like a sailboat. So a sailboat, it has like these sails and a hull and a keel, and it's designed as a boat to be able to fulfill the purpose for which it was made as a boat, to fulfill that purpose. I got a chance to see a sailboat, one of those that were made to go out onto the ocean, and it was up on a trailer, so it was out of the water, and I was really had no idea the proportions of this boat. It had, of course, the big sails that extended above the ship, but then below the hull, there was this keel. I mean, it went, I'll bet, 10 feet below the hull. And if you were just to see this boat out in the water, you would have no idea that it had this keel that was so far below the water. But that's what gave it the stability and the wind and the waves and all of the stuff that this boat is made to withstand out on the ocean. This vehicle is designed for a specific purpose. Or think of an axe. An axe is it has a sharp blade, it has a long handle, and it has a particular purpose that it was designed for. It was designed to cut down a tree. And that makes it different from, let's say, a pocket knife, where with a pocket knife and an axe, this axe has a long handle so that you have the momentum to be able to do the purpose that it was intended to cut down a tree. We are designed in the image of God with all of the unique gifts that God has given us for the purposes of God. So what are these purposes? What is it that this call of God has asked of us? So let's consider in verse 20, in verse 28, it says, "Be fruitful and multiply." This speaks to, for us, we have this call of God to family, to build families, to really to fill the earth, to build, to have children. And then God says, "Fill the earth and subdue it." So in this work to fill the earth and subdue it, God is saying that we should cultivate the earth. We should, grow crops. We should develop technology in order to help us to do this work to cultivate the earth. We should, in having dominion, we should create government. We should have all of this great new building of cities, building houses, that is a call of God that comes right out of verse 28 in Genesis 1. This is the call of God to vocation. But I want you to think about the truth of Genesis 1. So I love being able to look at something directly from the Word of God that you can kind of begin to wrestle with. Okay, this is what God said. What do I experience in life? Because the message that we get every day in our American culture is that religion and faith, that is a matter of kind of your private practice of religion. Ever heard any kind of a impression like that? Even heard that phrase, like private practice of religion? Because that's kind of how we're sort of framed up and how you're supposed to live out your Christian faith. And what they've done is they said, you can practice your religion privately so that we can protect this public square, where all of us can kind of come, regardless of our faith backgrounds, and have, individual pursuit of, whatever our specific, purpose might be, whatever our particular calling we look at might be. And this is the idea behind why you can't have a Bible study at work. It's why you can't pray when you're at school, because you can't bring that private practice of religion into this public square it's got to remain neutral. So when you think about that in terms of your Christian faith, you could be loving and kind and resist immorality. These are aspects of our Christian faith that fit pretty well in this paradigm of, private practice of religion that kind of stays over here on this one part of our lives. But what about vocation? What about calling? How does that fit with this? So what that feels like in our culture is that we end up thinking, religion, faith, this public square is not a place to bring your Christianity. You need to keep that in private. That needs to kind of stay out of this public square that we've tried to remain safe. And so the domain of expertise, if you will, for the church, for your Christian faith, is not these areas of calling and vocation and profession. But what we see in Genesis 1 is that we are made in his image for his purposes. And the only way that I can understand my calling, my vocation, my professional, the way I fulfill this thing that God has called me to do is in the context of what we learn of the call of God in Genesis 1. But the beautiful, perfect design of God that we see in Genesis 1, it did not continue. So if you continue reading in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, which I encourage you this week, go back and read this account and read it with an eye towards the call of God on your life. What we see is that Adam, he is tempted and he falls in sin. And with him, all of mankind falls with him. And so I want you to kind of look at this fall in the context of what happened to his vocational calling. So if you keep reading in Genesis 2, you see God places Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, Adam is doing exactly what you heard God command him to do in Genesis 1. He is cultivating the ground. He is growing crops. He's doing all these things. Well, then the fall happens. And the thing God says is, cursed is the ground. It will no longer yield its strength to you. This place that he had all originally had as a call, very call of God for him to execute as his purpose, is now, he says, cursed is that ground. Genesis 3, after he's kicked out, after the fall, you see God, he kicks Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. Directly out of this place where God had called him to exercise his vocational calling. It's this direct and outward revelation of this calling being revoked. So what do we do now? We have no calling from God anymore. We have all of these gifts. We have Adam and Eve, this man and woman with incredible gifts. But they have no calling. They have this family that God had made for them to grow. They had this land and these gifts to know how to cultivate the land. And they were meant to enjoy this as God had planned. But that calling is gone. So what do we do now? In the Christmas movie, it's a classic Christmas movie, White Christmas. I don't know how many of you have seen White Christmas, but in this movie, starring Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye, they are actually friends in the war, and they actually were soldiers, and they grow, as they get out of the army, they end up going to become entertainers. Well, in the course of being entertainers, they run into their old commander, General Waverly. So General Waverly, he's this general from the war, but now he's retired, and he meets these two friends from back during the war, and he seems a little out of sorts, and so Bing Crosby sings a song. So he sings a song. It's a musical. I mean, it's got Bing Crosby in it. There's going to be singing involved, right? So he sings a song, and this is what he says. What do you do with a general when he stops being a general? And that's exactly what I think about of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. What do you do now where you have all of these gifts, but you have no calling any longer? It's like you had this employer and you get fired, but you keep showing up every day for work because it's the only thing you know how to do. They're not paying you anymore. You're not employed by that employer anymore, but it's the only thing you know how to do, so you keep coming to try to do that very thing because it's all you know. So outside of the context of this call of God, how do we understand our gifting? Well, what happens is, for many, is they end up taking this good gift of God, intended for the purpose of God, and use it for, fame, money, popularity. But when you do those things outside of the call of God in the context of that calling, you kind of get down this road using these gifts and you've got this gnawing feeling like, something's missing. It's not enough. There should be more to this than just what I'm experiencing in this calling that I'm trying to fulfill. And, I think, people that have all this money, they start to accumulate wealth and they kind of get to this kind of crossroads where it's like, was this all I was supposed to do, was just make a lot of money? Because you have this sense of there's got to be more to life, to calling, to vocation, to fulfillment than just this one thing that I've seemed to do around money and fame and popularity. A biblical image of this is the life of Cain. So Cain and Abel, these were brothers. They were the sons of Adam and Eve. And you can read about Cain and Abel in Genesis 4. And what happens is that Cain was a skilled worker of the ground. So he knew how vocationally to employ his gifts for these good things. But out of jealousy, he kills his brother Abel. And so God punishes Cain, saying this: "Now you are cursed from the ground, and you shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." So Cain now is in exile, and he had to leave the land that he was called to and settle in a new place. And he has this new life, but it's outside of the purpose of God, the call of God. And in response, Cain says, "My punishment is more than I can bear." This is a picture of the futility of mankind after the fall, trying to, cultivate the ground, use the gifts God has given us outside of the context of that call of God. And just like Cain, we have all the gifts, but without that call, no context, no calling with which to employ those gifts. We have the what, we don't have the why. And I borrow that phrase from, there's a very popular business book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So if you read this book, Simon Sinek, he writes it to really kind of business application. And in this book, he talks about, basically breaks things down into 3 tiers. You have what, how, and why. The what is, the actual work that you do. For instance, the example given in the book is he has Dell and Apple. Both companies make computers, so that's their what. And then the how could be for these, maybe they have electronics distributors, or maybe they have, very innovative products that they develop to go to market. So this is their how. But then the why is the purpose behind why they do the business they do. And so the author in the book comes to take issue with Dell to say basically they just want to make computers, but they have no why. And if you took this idea and applied it to Cain and to us, we have the what, but we don't have the why apart from the purposes of God, the call of God on our lives. But praise be to God, that's not the end of the story. The grace of God enters the story as God sent his Son that we could be redeemed. And not only that we could be reconciled, but that we could see our lost calling redeemed as well. Listen to Paul describing this work of Christ in the context of calling in Ephesians chapter 2. "But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses and sin, he made us alive together with Christ." So let's start with this calling lost. So we were dead in the trespasses and sins in our lives. We were separated from God, and we were separated from that good calling that we talked about in Genesis 1. But that's not the end of the story. The phrase in Ephesians 2 continues to say, "By grace you have been saved through faith. And this not of your own doing, it is the gift of God." This is what Jesus did on the cross. Our salvation, this salvation that we have, it restored our life with God. It restored that broken relationship where Adam fell, where Adam sinned and was tempted and sinned against God and lost that place with God. What Jesus did on the cross in his salvation is restore that relationship. But there's more. Continue reading in Ephesians 2. It says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works." Good works. So this is the calling that we talked about in Genesis 1, being restored, that we could again be used by God in the good work that he has for us. And we think about the restoration of our relationship with God. And now in Ephesians 2, we see also the restoration of the call of God, of what he wants for us, of the fulfilling of the purpose, the giving of that place for us to be able to respond to his call, what he has for us to do. But now, this being a biblical understanding of calling, I think a temptation for us is to potentially kind of skip over the first part of a relationship with God that's being restored and perhaps go straight to the second, which is, I have all these gifts. What am I going to do? We are tempted to go there. But the calling that we have is from and to a person. Listen to the way Os Guinness describes this in the book, The Call. He says, "Our primary calling as followers of Christ is by him, to him, and from him. First and foremost, we are called to someone, God, not to something such as motherhood or teaching, or to somewhere such as the inner city. Our secondary calling considers who God is as sovereign, is that everyone, everywhere, and in everything should think, speak, live, and act entirely for him." So from God and for God is the very gifts that he's given. This is the call. And if we lose this piece of it is for him, for God, the calling, the relationship that it's for him, then it's almost like we have the what and we've lost the why. And that why should be the very animating source of the vocation, the profession, the life calling that we want to engage in. That's the why. And my prayer for us today is that we would recover this great and glorious calling from Genesis 1, that we'd be able to receive it, respond to it in all of its fullness and glory. So to close, I have one last quote that I want to share with you, and it comes from Joseph Conrad, who's a novelist, and he's quoted by Guinness as saying this: "The artist appeals to that part of our being which is a gift and not an acquisition, and therefore permanently enduring. Works of art, like many of the best things in life, can be products of both calling and commerce, but only the former is essential. A work of art can be sold on the market, or it can survive without the market, but it must not be reduced to solely a commodity." What a beautiful picture for us of calling. So when you think of great works of art, Da Vinci, Mozart, these artists, they create such incredible pieces of art that they really they have this place in us that it's like beyond putting a price on. Like you just can't put a price on it. It's got such a power that it elevates us, it encourages us. And when you experience those things in art, you could potentially sell, a painting or, the rights to a song. You could sell these, but even if you did, there's so much more to it than just whatever that price tag might be, because they have this value that's bigger than money. and like this is our calling. Our calling from God. Whether we employ that calling as a pastor, as a business person, as a healthcare worker, as a teacher, whatever that thing is, our calling is more than what we get paid to do. Hear this incredible call of God, that we could, in our lives, make it that masterpiece, that incredible work of art, a life that transcends money or fame or whatever that thing is, and instead becomes a picture of what God has designed you to be in all of its glory for his praise and honor and glory. Let's pray.